Before you settle in for tonight's journey, take a quiet moment to imagine standing alone on a lonely hillside in central Turkey. The wind moves gently across the dry grass. Birds circle high above the rocky landscape. Nothing around you suggests that beneath your feet lies one of the greatest engineering achievements of the ancient world. Hidden below the ordinary ground stretches a vast underground city, with tunnels, homes, kitchens, churches, wells, storage rooms, and secret passages descending many levels into darkness. No towering walls announce its presence. No magnificent palace rises into the sky. For centuries, travelers walked across this land without realizing that thousands of people had once lived directly beneath them. Families cooked meals underground. Children laughed inside hidden corridors. Priests whispered prayers in stone chambers, lit only by flickering oil lamps. Merchants stored grain deep beneath the earth, while soldiers waited silently behind enormous circular stone doors, designed to seal entire neighborhoods from danger. Tonight, we will slowly explore these remarkable underground cities, not as hurried tourists, but as quiet visitors, moving carefully through history itself. Together, we will discover why people chose to disappear beneath the earth, how they transformed soft volcanic rock into thriving communities, and how these hidden worlds protected generations during some of history's most uncertain times. As always, there is no need to stay awake until the end. Simply relax, let your imagination wander through the cool stone corridors, and allow the gentle rhythm of history to guide you peacefully towards sleep. Long before the first underground city reached its greatest size, nature had already begun preparing the landscape over millions of years. Massive volcanic eruptions covered central Anatolia with layers of ash that slowly hardened into an unusual rock known as tuff. Unlike solid granite, this soft volcanic stone could be carved using surprisingly simple tools, while remaining stable enough to support rooms, tunnels, and entire underground neighborhoods. This extraordinary landscape became known as Cappadocia, a region unlike almost anywhere else on Earth. Wind and rain patiently sculpted the volcanic rock into strange pillars, deep valleys, towering cliffs, and cone-shaped formations that today attract visitors from around the world. Yet the most remarkable creations were never visible from the surface. They remained hidden below, waiting for human hands to unlock their possibilities. Life in ancient Anatolia was never entirely predictable. Powerful kingdoms rose and collapsed. Trade routes shifted across the region. Armies marched through fertile valleys. Seasons brought both abundance and hardship. Communities living here learned that survival often depended on careful preparation rather than simple good fortune. Many early settlements relied on the natural caves already scattered throughout the rocky landscape. These caves provided cool shelter during hot summers and protection from winter winds. Over generations, people gradually discovered that they could enlarge these spaces, carving additional rooms whenever families grew larger or new storage became necessary. At first, these underground spaces were modest. A few connected chambers offered little more than shelter and storage. Yet every generation inherited the work of those who came before. Instead of abandoning older rooms, they expanded them. A narrow passage became a hallway. One chamber became several. Storage areas multiplied. Wells reached deeper into the ground. Ventilation shafts improved the flow of fresh air.
No single ruler appears to have designed these hidden worlds from the beginning. Instead, they evolved slowly through countless practical decisions made by ordinary people responding to everyday challenges. That gradual growth explains why many underground cities feel almost organic, twisting and turning in unexpected directions, rather than following perfect geometric plans. Above ground, daily life continued much as it always had. Farmers cultivated wheat and barley across the surrounding plains. Shepherds guided sheep and goats over rocky hillsides. Potters shaped clay into useful vessels. Blacksmiths repaired tools. Merchants carried goods between distant towns. To an outsider, these settlements appeared entirely ordinary. Yet beneath many homes, another world was quietly taking shape. Each season added new rooms. Every generation deepened the network a little further. Parents taught children where hidden entrances lay. Knowledge passed from one family to the next. Over many centuries, what began as scattered shelters slowly transformed into something astonishing, a vast underground landscape that could one day shelter entire communities whenever danger appeared on the horizon. No one living during those early years could have imagined just how enormous these hidden cities would eventually become. But the foundations had already been laid, carved patiently into the quiet volcanic stone beneath their feet, waiting for history to give them a reason to grow ever deeper into the earth.
The quiet expansion continued almost unnoticed. A visitor arriving during one generation might have seen only a handful of simple dwellings scattered across the hills. Returning a century later, the same traveler would likely notice little difference above ground. The fields would still be cultivated, animals would still graze across the valleys, smoke would still rise from ordinary homes. Yet beneath those familiar scenes, the hidden world had grown steadily larger. Every new chamber reflected a practical need rather than a grand architectural vision. When a family needed more space for storing grain after a successful harvest, they carved another room. When livestock required shelter during harsh winters, another passage was extended. When a fresh water source became difficult to reach, workers carefully dug deeper until they discovered groundwater that could be protected from contamination. The volcanic tuff made this gradual expansion possible. Although soft enough to shape with iron tools, it remained surprisingly strong once carved. Builders learned through experience which walls should remain thick, where ceilings needed gentle curves to distribute weight, and how pillars could support larger chambers without risking collapse. Their knowledge came from observation rather than written engineering manuals. Fathers taught sons, experienced stoneworkers instructed younger apprentices. Mistakes were remembered and rarely repeated. Over generations, an impressive understanding of underground construction emerged without the aid of modern mathematics or machinery. Ventilation soon became one of their greatest achievements. Digging deeper created an obvious problem. Fresh air could not simply drift through endless tunnels. Without careful planning, smoke from cooking fires would gather inside living spaces, making daily life impossible. To solve this challenge, the builders carved narrow vertical shafts stretching upward towards the surface. These shafts quietly drew fresh air downwards while allowing warm, smoky air to rise naturally out of the city. Some reached remarkable depths, supplying oxygen to multiple underground levels at once. These openings served another purpose as well. Many doubled as wells, providing reliable access to clean water even during times when enemies might control the surface. In some cities, the wells were designed so that only people underground could reach the water. Anyone standing above would have no easy way to poison or steal this precious resource. Such careful planning suggests that security was becoming increasingly important. Life in ancient Anatolia could change without warning. Small conflicts between neighboring communities were common. Larger kingdoms competed for valuable trade routes crossing the region. Armies sometimes appeared with little notice, leaving villagers only a short time to gather their belongings. Rather than abandoning everything they owned, people began preparing for emergencies long before danger arrived.
Food storage became a central priority. Underground chambers maintained cool, stable temperatures throughout the year. Grain lasted longer. Dried fruits remained edible for months. Olive oil stayed protected from extreme heat. Large ceramic jars lined storage rooms, each carefully sealed against moisture and pests. The deeper the rooms extended, the more naturally cool they remained. Even during the hottest summers above ground, the underground temperature changed very little. What modern visitors often describe as chilly would have felt wonderfully comfortable to ancient families escaping intense Anatolian heat. Animals also became part of this hidden world. Goats, sheep, and sometimes even cattle could be brought underground for short periods when danger threatened. Separate chambers helped reduce unpleasant odors while protecting valuable livestock that represented a family's wealth and survival. As the underground spaces expanded, daily routines slowly adapted to them. Children grew up memorizing twisting corridors as naturally as others learned village streets. Elderly residents knew every hidden corner by heart. Families developed quiet systems for moving through the tunnels without becoming lost, even in the dim light of simple oil lamps. The walls themselves became familiar companions. Small niches were carved into stone to hold lamps. Shelves appeared wherever extra storage was useful. Steps were cut directly into the rock, worn smooth by countless feet over many generations. Every mark on the walls reflected ordinary life rather than decoration. Perhaps the most remarkable feature of all was how little attention these growing cities attracted from outsiders. Above ground, almost nothing revealed the enormous network hidden below. Entrances were often built inside ordinary homes, tucked behind storage rooms, concealed beneath courtyards, or disguised among natural rock formations. Someone walking only a few steps away might never suspect that dozens or even hundreds of people could be living safely beneath the surface. Little by little, these underground communities became more than temporary shelters. They were evolving into complete worlds of their own, capable of supporting entire families for days, weeks, and eventually much longer, whenever the uncertainty of history made the world above too dangerous to trust.
As these hidden communities became more capable of supporting daily life, the people who carved them began thinking beyond simple survival. An underground shelter was no longer just a place to hide for a night or two. It was becoming a place where life could continue almost uninterrupted, even while uncertainty unfolded above. This change happened gradually. One family expanded a sleeping room into several connected chambers. Another carved a larger kitchen where meals could be prepared for many people at once. Storage rooms multiplied, not because anyone expected immediate disaster, but because experience had taught them that careful preparation often meant the difference between comfort and hardship. The deeper they ventured into the earth, the quieter the outside world became. The sounds of wind disappeared, rain no longer drummed against rooftops, even the footsteps of passing travelers faded into silence. Instead, the underground city developed its own gentle rhythm. The soft crackle of oil lamps echoed through stone corridors. Voices carried surprisingly far along narrow passages. Somewhere in the distance, water quietly trickled through a deep well. Living beneath the earth required remarkable organization. Unlike a village spread across open fields, every passage underground connected directly to many others. A blocked corridor could isolate entire sections of the city. Builders, therefore, planned multiple routes whenever possible, allowing people to move safely between important areas. The narrow tunnels were not accidents. Many were intentionally carved just wide enough for one or two people to walk side by side. This reduced the amount of rock that needed to be removed, while also making the city easier to defend if hostile visitors somehow discovered an entrance. Occasionally, a tunnel would suddenly open into a surprisingly spacious chamber. These larger rooms served many purposes. Families gathered there to share meals. Community discussions took place in their cool surroundings. During difficult times, they became places where neighbors encouraged one another, exchanged news, and planned for whatever might happen next. Some chambers still preserve long stone benches carved directly from the surrounding rock. Unlike wooden furniture, these benches became permanent parts of the city itself. Generations of residents sat in exactly the same places, leaving the smooth surfaces gently polished through centuries of daily use. Light remained one of the greatest challenges. Without sunlight, every activity depended upon carefully tended lamps. Olive oil burned slowly, producing a warm, steady flame that illuminated nearby walls without filling the chambers with excessive smoke. Small recesses carved into the stone held these lamps securely, preventing accidental fires while spreading light throughout important rooms. Darkness, however, was never completely banished.
Only a short distance beyond each lamp, shadows gathered quietly along the tunnel walls. Children growing up underground would have become familiar with this gentle half-light, learning to navigate corridors where strangers might struggle to see. Time itself felt different below the surface. Without the rising and setting sun, people relied on routine rather than daylight. Meals, work, prayer, and rest followed familiar patterns passed down through generations. Occasionally, someone climbed to the surface to observe the weather, monitor the seasons, or check whether it was safe for everyone else to emerge. These trips required caution. Hidden entrances were carefully watched. If danger appeared nearby, the warning spread quickly through the underground passages. Every resident understood the importance of remaining silent when necessary. Loud noises could echo through the tunnels, carrying much further than expected.
Even ordinary household tasks were adapted to underground life. Grain was ground using heavy stone mills placed inside larger chambers. Bread dough was prepared in cool kitchens where the stable temperature helped preserve ingredients. Smoke from ovens escaped through cleverly designed ventilation systems, often blending with ordinary household smoke rising from buildings above so that nothing seemed unusual. Water was used sparingly. Every bucket carried from the wells represented valuable effort. Families learned to waste very little, developing habits of careful conservation long before such practices became modern concerns. Despite the challenges, there was also comfort in these hidden spaces. The temperature remained pleasantly steady through every season. Winter winds could not reach the sleeping chambers. Summer heat stayed above the surface. While storms swept across the valleys outside, life underground often continued with remarkable calm. Slowly, the underground city ceased to feel like a refuge waiting for disaster. Instead, it became another version of home, a quieter world shaped not by sunlight and open skies, but by patience, cooperation, and the enduring determination of ordinary people who had learned that sometimes the safest place to build a future was beneath the earth itself. Only a short distance beyond each lamp, shadows gathered quietly along the tunnel walls. Children growing up underground would have become familiar with this gentle half-light, learning to navigate corridors where strangers might struggle to see. Time itself felt different below the surface. Without the rising and setting sun, people relied on routine rather than daylight. Meals, work, prayer, and rest followed familiar patterns passed down through generations. Occasionally, someone climbed to the surface to observe the weather, monitor the seasons, or check whether it was safe for everyone else to emerge. These trips required caution. Hidden entrances were carefully watched. If danger appeared nearby, the warning spread quickly through the underground passages. Every resident understood the importance of remaining silent when necessary. Loud noises could echo through the tunnels, carrying much further than expected. Even ordinary household tasks were adapted to underground life. Grain was ground using heavy stone mills placed inside larger chambers. Bread dough was prepared in cool kitchens where the stable temperature helped preserve ingredients. Smoke from ovens escaped through cleverly designed ventilation systems, often blending with ordinary household smoke rising from buildings above so that nothing seemed unusual. Water was used sparingly. Every bucket carried from the wells represented valuable effort. Families learned to waste very little, developing habits of careful conservation long before such practices became modern concerns. Despite the challenges, there was also comfort in these hidden spaces. The temperature remained pleasantly steady through every season. Winter winds could not reach the sleeping chambers. Summer heat stayed above the surface. While storms swept across the valleys outside, life underground often continued with remarkable calm. Slowly, the underground city ceased to feel like a refuge waiting for disaster. Instead, it became another version of home, a quieter world shaped not by sunlight and open skies, but by patience, cooperation, and the enduring determination of ordinary people who had learned that sometimes the safest place to build a future was beneath the earth itself.
By the time these underground settlements had matured into thriving communities, nearly every important part of daily life had found its place beneath the earth. The cities no longer depended entirely on the surface for comfort or routine. Instead, they had become carefully organized worlds where each chamber served a purpose, and every passage connected people in ways that reflected generations of thoughtful planning. Among the first places many residents visited each morning were the communal kitchens. These rooms were usually larger than the cooking spaces inside individual homes, allowing several families to prepare food at the same time. Stone ovens were carved directly into the walls, their rounded interiors trapping heat long after the fire had burned down. Nearby, shelves held clay jars filled with flour, dried beans, lentils, herbs, and precious olive oil. The scent of freshly baked bread would have drifted softly through the nearby corridors. Unlike modern kitchens filled with bright electric lights and polished surfaces, these spaces glowed with the warm, gentle flicker of oil lamps.
Shadows danced across rough stone walls, while neighbors exchanged quiet conversations as they kneaded dough or stirred simple stews over glowing embers. Meals themselves were modest but nourishing. Bread formed the foundation of nearly every table. It was accompanied by olives, cheese made from goats or sheep's milk, dried fruits, onions, garlic, and seasonal vegetables gathered from the fields above. On special occasions, meat might be prepared, though for many families it remained an occasional luxury rather than a daily meal. Nothing was allowed to go to waste. Large storage chambers protected valuable food supplies against moisture and pests. Some rooms contained enormous clay vessels almost as tall as an adult, capable of holding enough grain to feed dozens of people for extended periods. Others stored wine, oil, or preserved vegetables sealed carefully beneath thick lids. The stable underground temperature helped keep these supplies remarkably fresh. Long before refrigeration existed, the earth itself provided a natural solution. Even during the hottest months of summer, the air remained cool enough to slow spoilage. This simple advantage made underground storage one of the greatest strengths of the hidden cities. Water, however, remained even more precious than food. Deep wells reached into underground water sources that had been protected for generations. Drawing water required patience and steady effort. Every drop carried from the well was valued, whether it was used for drinking, cooking, cleaning, or caring for animals sheltered below. Children learned these lessons from an early age.
Fetching water, carrying firewood, helping prepare meals, and keeping living spaces clean became ordinary responsibilities. As they grew older, they also memorized the city's winding passages until navigating the underground maze became as natural as walking through the streets of any village above. Learning happened everywhere. Parents passed practical knowledge directly to their children, while elders shared stories about earlier generations who had first carved these chambers from solid rock. Through these stories, young listeners came to understand that every tunnel around them represented years of patient labor and careful cooperation. Life underground also encouraged close relationships between neighbors. Privacy existed, but complete isolation was almost impossible. Families regularly crossed paths while collecting water, preparing food, tending storage rooms, or moving through shared corridors. Small acts of kindness became part of everyday survival. Someone might help repair a damaged doorway, share extra grain after a poor harvest, or care for an elderly neighbor unable to climb steep passageways. This strong sense of community proved invaluable whenever difficult times arrived. No family faced hardship entirely alone. Resources could be shared, work could be divided, knowledge passed freely from one household to another. Living underground demanded cooperation, and over many generations, that cooperation became woven into daily life itself. Even the animals contributed to this carefully balanced world. Separate chambers sheltered goats, sheep, chickens, and occasionally larger livestock brought underground during dangerous periods. Their presence ensured a steady supply of milk, eggs, wool, and other essentials, while also protecting valuable animals from raiders or harsh weather above. Keeping both people and animals healthy required constant attention. Ventilation shafts carried away stale air, while regular cleaning prevented disease from spreading through the enclosed spaces. Though conditions would seem primitive by modern standards, archaeological evidence suggests that these communities understood the importance of cleanliness far better than many people might expect. As evening settled over the hills above, darkness below changed very little. Oil lamps continued to burn quietly. Families gathered for simple meals before settling into their carved stone rooms. Children listened to familiar stories, while older generations reflected on another peaceful day that had passed safely beneath the earth. Beyond the thick layers of volcanic rock, kingdoms continued to rise and fall, rulers came and went, and armies marched across distant landscapes. Yet deep within these hidden cities, ordinary life moved forward with remarkable steadiness, protected by stone, sustained by careful planning, and strengthened by a community that understood the true value of working together in silence beneath the world above.
As the underground cities grew more complete, one question became increasingly important. If hundreds or even thousands of people could live beneath the earth, how could they keep such a place safe? Food could be stored, water could be protected, fresh air could be guided through deep shafts, but none of those preparations would matter if an enemy discovered the entrances. Over many generations, the builders developed answers that were both simple and remarkably effective. The first line of defense was secrecy. Most entrances were deliberately difficult to recognize. Some were hidden inside ordinary homes, concealed beneath wooden floors, or tucked behind storage rooms. Others opened inside barns, courtyards, or among natural rock formations that blended perfectly into the surrounding landscape. To an unfamiliar traveler, nothing seemed unusual. A peaceful farming village rested quietly beneath the open sky, giving little reason to suspect that an entire city lay below.
Even if someone happened to discover an entrance, reaching the deeper levels was far from easy. The passageways often twisted sharply, forcing anyone entering to slow their pace. Some corridors narrowed so much that only one person could move through at a time. Tall soldiers carrying weapons would struggle to advance together, while defenders familiar with every corner could move quickly through alternate routes carved into the surrounding rock. Then there were the great stone doors. Perhaps no feature of the underground cities has fascinated archaeologists more than these enormous circular stones. Carved from solid rock, many measured well over a meter in height and weighed hundreds of kilograms. Yet despite their immense size, they could be rolled into position with surprising efficiency by people inside the city. Each door fit snugly across a narrow passage. Once closed, it created a nearly solid barrier. A small opening near its center allowed those inside to observe the corridor beyond or to pass a spear through if absolutely necessary. Anyone approaching from outside faced an obstacle that was extraordinarily difficult to move, especially within the confined tunnel. What made these doors especially clever was their placement.
They were rarely positioned at the main entrance. Instead, they guarded important junctions deeper inside the city. Even if strangers managed to enter the first few chambers, they could quickly find themselves stopped by another sealed passage, uncertain of how much further the city continued beyond. Defense did not depend on walls alone. The layout itself became a form of protection. Narrow stairways connected different levels, sometimes turning sharply around corners where visibility was limited. Residents who knew every route could guide families towards safer areas, while keeping watch over the few passages an intruder might attempt to use. Communication also played an essential role. Although no written instructions survive describing emergency procedures, the design of these cities suggests that people understood the importance of acting together. A warning given near one entrance could spread rapidly through connected corridors. Lamps might be extinguished to reduce visibility. Families would gather essential belongings, while experienced residents secured vulnerable passages. Preparation replaced panic. No one waited until danger arrived to decide what should be done. Generations living in regions shaped by conflict understood that calm organization often provided the greatest protection. Every household knew where supplies were stored, which routes led to deeper chambers, and which doors should be closed first if necessary. Yet the underground cities were not built only for war. Long periods of peace allowed daily life to continue much as it always had. Farmers still climbed to the surface each morning to tend their crops. Shepherds guided their flocks across familiar hillsides. Children played beneath the open sky, returning underground only when evening arrived or when circumstances required greater caution. This balance between ordinary life and quiet preparedness became one of the defining characteristics of these remarkable communities. They did not expect danger every day. Instead, they accepted that uncertainty was simply part of life. Rather than allowing fear to control them, they invested their energy in careful planning, knowing that wise preparation offered reassurance even during peaceful times. The underground city reflected that philosophy in every carved wall and carefully shaped corridor. Nothing was excessive. Every chamber had a purpose. Every tunnel connected thoughtfully to another. Every stone door stood ready, without interfering with ordinary routines. It was an architecture built not to impress distant visitors, but to protect families whose greatest wish was simply to continue living together in safety. Above the surface, seasons continued to change. Spring rains nourished the fields. Summer brought golden harvests. Autumn filled storage rooms with grain and fruit. Winter covered the valleys with silence. And beneath those changing skies, hidden behind thick volcanic stone, an entire community rested quietly, prepared for whatever history might bring next.
History rarely remains peaceful for long. As the generations passed, the people of central Anatolia witnessed kingdoms rise with great confidence, only to disappear into memory a few centuries later. Borders shifted, new rulers claimed ancient lands, trade caravans changed their routes, and distant conflicts often reached even the quiet valleys where farming communities had lived for generations. For the families who had patiently expanded their underground cities, these changes reinforced a lesson they already understood well. the safest refuge was the one prepared long before it was needed. Whenever uncertainty spread across the region, life above the ground changed first. Travelers arrived carrying troubling news from distant towns. Merchants spoke of armies marching along familiar roads. Shepherds returning from the hills sometimes reported unfamiliar camps appearing on the horizon. Most of the time, such reports led to nothing more than cautious observation. But occasionally, the danger became real. When that happened, the transformation of the village could occur with remarkable speed. Farmers gathered the last of their tools from the fields. Children were quietly called home. Animals were guided toward hidden entrances. Valuable supplies disappeared from ordinary houses, carried carefully into the cool chambers below. Before long, the surface settlement appeared strangely empty, as though its people had vanished without leaving a trace. Yet they had not gone far. Only a short distance beneath the quiet streets, hundreds of people continued their lives inside the hidden city. The great stone doors were rolled into place one by one. The heavy circles of rock moved slowly across the floor until each passage was securely sealed. Once closed, they transformed familiar hallways into protected neighborhoods, allowing the residents to wait in relative safety while events unfolded outside. Inside, calm was far more valuable than fear. Panic could waste precious supplies and cloud good judgment. Instead, the community followed routines that had likely been practiced many times before. Water was collected according to careful schedules. Food stores were checked. Oil lamps were trimmed to conserve fuel. Children remained close to their families, while experienced elders offered reassurance through familiar stories and quiet conversation. Life became slower but did not stop. Bread was still baked, meals were still shared, prayers were still whispered inside stone chambers where soft lamplight flickered against ancient walls. The underground city had been designed precisely for moments like these, not merely to keep people alive, but to preserve the ordinary rhythms that gave life its meaning.
Days underground required patience. Without constant access to sunlight, the passing of time depended on routine rather than the movement of the sky. Families woke, worked, rested, and slept according to habits developed over many generations. Someone might occasionally climb towards a concealed observation point to quietly examine the surrounding landscape before returning with news of what lay above. Sometimes the reports were encouraging. The danger had passed. Travelers had continued on their journey. The roads were once again peaceful. When that happened, the heavy stone doors were rolled aside, hidden entrances reopened, and the village slowly returned to the sunlight as though nothing unusual had occurred. Fields still needed tending, animals still required care. Life resumed almost exactly where it had paused. This ability to move gracefully between the surface and the underground world became one of the greatest strengths of these communities. They did not permanently abandon one life for another. Instead, they lived comfortably in both, adapting to circumstances with remarkable flexibility. Archaeologists believe that some underground cities may have sheltered thousands of people during periods of instability. Maintaining such large populations required extraordinary cooperation. Every family understood that shared resources belonged to the entire community. Waste could not be tolerated. Water had to be protected. Food needed careful distribution. Individual survival depended upon collective responsibility. Perhaps that is one of the most remarkable lessons these hidden cities still offer today. Their greatest achievement was not simply carving millions of kilograms of volcanic rock. It was creating communities built upon trust. Every tunnel represented shared effort. Every storage room reflected careful planning. Every well, every ventilation shaft, every hidden doorway depended upon generations of neighbors working together for a future they themselves might never fully see. Above them, empires continued their endless cycle of expansion and decline. Kings celebrated victories, dynasties disappeared, new banners replaced old ones. But beneath the hills of Cappadocia, ordinary families quietly preserved something far more enduring, a way of life built not upon conquest or wealth, but upon cooperation, resilience, and the quiet confidence that even in uncertain times, people could protect one another beneath the steady shelter of the earth.
As years became decades and decades became centuries, the underground cities continued to evolve alongside the people who depended on them.
They were no longer simply places of refuge built by anonymous hands. They had become living communities where every generation added something new, leaving behind small traces of their own lives within the ancient stone. With so many people sharing the same hidden world, daily life required more than food and shelter. It also required places where the community could gather, learn, celebrate, and quietly reflect together. Some of the largest chambers served exactly this purpose. Unlike the narrow corridors that connected homes and storage rooms, these halls opened into surprisingly spacious interiors. Their ceilings rose higher above the floor, allowing many people to stand together without feeling confined. Stone benches lined portions of the walls, while the smooth floors showed signs of countless footsteps made over hundreds of years. Here, important conversations likely unfolded. Village elders discussed harvests and supplies. Families settled disagreements peacefully. Visitors from neighboring communities exchanged news about changing conditions across the region. In times of uncertainty, these gathering halls became places where calm decisions could be made before fear had the chance to spread. Learning was equally important. Long before formal schools became common, knowledge passed naturally from one generation to the next. Children learned practical skills by watching experienced adults. They observed how bread was baked, how tools were repaired, how grain was stored, and how every passage of the underground city was carefully maintained. The city itself became a classroom. Every carved wall carried a lesson. Young boys learned how to strengthen a tunnel without weakening the surrounding rock. Young girls mastered the careful preparation of food that could remain fresh for long periods. Both learned where hidden wells could be found, how ventilation shafts functioned, and why every chamber had been placed exactly where it was. Stories also became teachers. Evenings often ended with elders recalling memories handed down through many generations. Some stories explained how the first chambers had been carved into the soft volcanic stone. Others spoke of difficult winters, distant invasions, or miraculous escapes made possible by the hidden passages beneath the earth. Whether every detail was historically accurate mattered less than the lessons they carried. They reminded each new generation that survival depended upon wisdom, patience, and cooperation, rather than strength alone. Religion gradually found its place within these underground worlds as well. As Christianity spread across Anatolia during the Roman and Byzantine periods, believers sometimes gathered below ground to worship together. Archaeologists have discovered beautifully carved chapels and churches hidden deep within several underground cities, their walls still preserving simple crosses and religious symbols created many centuries ago. These sacred spaces were intentionally peaceful. Unlike grand cathedrals built to inspire awe through towering architecture, underground chapels relied on quiet simplicity. The gentle glow of oil lamps reflected from pale stone walls, while prayers echoed softly through the cool chambers, creating an atmosphere of calm that modern visitors often describe as deeply moving. For many families, faith offered comfort during uncertain times. Whether they were hiding from conflict or simply gathering for regular worship, these underground churches became places where hope could remain alive, even when the outside world seemed unpredictable. Music may also have echoed through these chambers. Simple songs accompanied religious gatherings, family celebrations, and seasonal festivals. The stone walls naturally amplified gentle voices, allowing melodies to drift through nearby corridors without the need for large instruments or grand performance halls. Births were celebrated here. Children took their first steps along stone floors worn smooth by countless generations before them. Young couples began married life inside homes carved from the same volcanic rock their ancestors had shaped centuries earlier. And when members of the community reached the end of their lives, they were remembered not only for what they owned, but for the work they had contributed to the city itself. Perhaps a grandfather had expanded a storage room. Perhaps a mother had organized food supplies during difficult years. Perhaps a skilled stone worker had carved a new ventilation shaft that continued serving families long after his own lifetime had ended. In this way, the underground city became something larger than its buildings. It became a living memory. Every tunnel connected not only different rooms, but different generations. The children playing in one chamber unknowingly walked through spaces their great-grandparents had patiently carved. The meals prepared in familiar kitchens relied upon wells dug by people whose names had long since been forgotten. And every evening, as the warm glow of oil lamps illuminated the quiet passages once again, the hidden city reminded its people that while rulers and empires might change above the surface, the strength of a community was measured by the care it showed one another beneath the earth.
The hidden cities were never completely alone. Beyond the valleys and rocky hills of Cappadocia, other communities faced many of the same challenges. They too lived in a land shaped by shifting kingdoms, uncertain frontiers, and long trade routes that carried both opportunity and danger. Over time, this shared experience encouraged relationships between neighboring settlements, creating a quiet network of communities that understood one another's way of life. Travel between villages remained an important part of everyday existence. When conditions were peaceful, farmers exchanged surplus grain for pottery, woven cloth, olive oil, or carefully crafted tools. Shepherds moved their flocks across seasonal grazing lands, while merchants carried valuable goods from one market to another. News traveled with them, often spreading long before any official messenger arrived. These visitors did more than trade. They shared practical knowledge. If one settlement discovered a better method for carving stronger ceilings, the idea gradually reached neighboring villages. If another community improved the design of a ventilation shaft or found a more effective way to preserve food underground, those innovations quietly spread across the region through ordinary conversation rather than written instruction. The underground cities themselves reflected this steady exchange of ideas. Although each city possessed its own unique layout, archaeologists have noticed striking similarities between many of them. Deep wells, carefully positioned ventilation shafts, circular stone doors, storage chambers, kitchens, and places of worship appear again and again, suggesting that generations of builders learned from one another over many centuries. No single city stood as a perfect model. Instead, each community adapted familiar ideas to the landscape beneath its own feet. Some hills contained softer rock that allowed wider chambers. Others required narrower tunnels to maintain stability. Every underground city became a careful conversation between human ingenuity and the natural character of the volcanic stone surrounding it. Above ground, trade routes continued connecting Anatolia with distant civilizations. Caravans carrying silk, spices, metalwork, glass, and precious textiles passed through nearby regions on journeys that stretched across continents. Although many underground communities remained modest farming settlements, they were never completely isolated from the wider world. Foreign coins occasionally reached local markets.
New farming techniques slowly appeared. Different languages could sometimes be heard among traveling merchants stopping to rest before continuing their long journeys east or west. Yet despite these outside influences, the rhythm of life beneath the earth remained remarkably consistent. The underground cities changed slowly because they had been built for endurance rather than fashion. Each new chamber was expected to serve not only the present generation, but many generations still to come. That long view encouraged thoughtful decisions. Builders avoided unnecessary decoration. Resources were used carefully. Repairs received as much attention as new construction. Nothing was wasted if it could still serve a useful purpose. This practical mindset became especially valuable whenever neighboring communities faced hardship. A poor harvest in one valley might be eased by grain shared from another. Families displaced by conflict could sometimes find temporary shelter among friends whose underground cities still possessed empty rooms. Cooperation extended well beyond the boundaries of any single settlement. It became part of the region's quiet resilience. Modern historians cannot always reconstruct every relationship between these hidden communities. Written records remain limited. Many ordinary people left behind no personal documents describing their daily lives. Instead, archaeologists rely upon the silent evidence preserved within the stone itself. Matching construction techniques, similar storage systems, nearly identical defensive features, common architectural patterns. Together, these clues reveal a landscape where knowledge traveled steadily from one generation to the next and from one village to another, strengthening the entire region without the need for great monuments or famous rulers. Perhaps that is why these underground cities continue to inspire such fascination today. They remind us that remarkable achievements do not always require vast empires or legendary kings. Sometimes they grow quietly through the patient efforts of ordinary neighbors willing to learn from one another, share their experience, and prepare together for an uncertain future. As seasons continued passing across the hills above, the hidden cities remained linked by more than geography. They were connected by trust, by shared wisdom,
and by the quiet understanding that beneath the familiar landscape of Cappadocia, countless lives were unfolding in hidden chambers where cooperation had become every bit as valuable as the stone from which those remarkable cities had been carved.
As the underground cities continued to serve generation after generation, the world above entered one of the most transformative periods in its history. The influence of the Roman Empire gradually spread across Anatolia, bringing new roads, expanding trade, and introducing different systems of government. For many communities, daily life became connected to a much larger world than ever before. Yet even as Rome's authority reached these distant landscapes, the underground cities did not disappear. Instead, they quietly adapted. Roman engineers were celebrated for building grand aqueducts, paved roads, and magnificent public buildings. But in Cappadocia, the greatest architectural treasures still remained hidden beneath the earth. The local people understood their underground homes better than anyone else, and they continued to improve them with the same patience their ancestors had practiced for centuries. During this period, another quiet transformation was taking place. Christianity, which began as a small religious movement within the Roman world, slowly spread throughout Anatolia. At first, many Christians lived carefully, particularly during periods when the religion was viewed with suspicion by Roman authorities. Although historians continue to debate exactly how often underground cities were used specifically for religious refuge, there is little doubt that these hidden spaces offered privacy and security when circumstances required discretion. Within the cool stone chambers, small places of worship appeared. Simple crosses were carved into walls. Modest chapels were created by enlarging existing rooms. Unlike the grand temples of the Roman world, these sacred spaces emphasized humility rather than grandeur. Their beauty came not from gold or marble, but from quiet simplicity. The soft glow of oil lamps illuminated rough stone ceilings, while prayers echoed gently through the underground halls. For those gathered there, the silence itself became part of the experience. Far above, life continued much as it always had. Roman officials collected taxes. Merchants traveled along increasingly organized roads. Markets offered goods arriving from distant provinces, stretching across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. The people of Cappadocia participated in this growing network, while still preserving the unique traditions that had shaped their hidden communities for generations. Children growing up during the Roman era experienced two worlds at once. On peaceful mornings, they might accompany their parents into open fields beneath bright blue skies, helping tend crops or care for animals. Later that same day, they could return through a concealed entrance into cool underground corridors where familiar lamps glowed softly against ancient walls. To them, this transition felt entirely natural.
The surface and the underground were not separate lives, they were simply different parts of the same home. As the years slipped quietly by, the Roman world itself began to change. Political rivalries became more frequent, emperors rose to power only to be replaced by others within a short time. Along the empire's vast frontiers, new peoples moved across Europe and Western Asia, placing increasing pressure on territories that Rome had controlled for centuries. For the families living beneath the hills of Cappadocia, these distant events were not merely stories carried by travelers. Sooner or later, every major political change affected the roads, the markets, and the villages that connected the region to the wider world. Trade sometimes flourished, at other times it slowed dramatically. Caravans that once arrived regularly became less predictable, and local communities once again relied heavily on the careful planning that had sustained them for generations. Their underground cities proved as valuable as ever. The cool storage rooms protected grain during uncertain years. Deep wells continued supplying fresh water regardless of conditions above. Ventilation shafts quietly carried clean air through the hidden chambers, allowing daily life to continue with remarkable stability. When periods of peace returned, people emerged into the sunlight and resumed their familiar routines. Fields were planted, vineyards were tended, children chased one another across open courtyards, while shepherds guided their flocks through the surrounding valleys. To an outsider, the villages appeared calm and ordinary. Few would have guessed that beneath every familiar path lay an intricate world capable of sheltering entire communities. By the 4th century, Christianity had become the dominant religion of the Eastern Roman Empire, and the hidden chapels carved into Cappadocia's underground cities gradually became more important to community life. Priests gathered believers for worship beneath softly glowing lamps. Simple hymns echoed gently through the stone halls.
Families celebrated baptisms, weddings, and religious festivals inside chambers that had once served only as storage rooms or shelters. Faith became woven into the rhythm of everyday life. Many churches were decorated with modest carvings rather than elaborate ornaments. The walls themselves carried quiet symbols of hope: a carved cross, a simple arch, a carefully shaped altar carved directly from the living rock. Nothing appeared extravagant. Everything reflected the practical spirit that defined these remarkable communities. The Byzantine Empire, which grew from the eastern half of the Roman world, continued to govern Anatolia for centuries. Although powerful emperors ruled from the distant city of Constantinople, everyday life in Cappadocia remained rooted in local traditions. Farmers still depended upon the seasons. Stone workers still maintained tunnels carved by their ancestors. Children still learned every winding corridor before they were old enough to explore the surrounding hills alone. Then new dangers began appearing along the empire's eastern frontiers. Raiding parties occasionally swept across the countryside, sometimes giving villages little warning before they arrived. These moments reminded everyone why the underground cities had never been abandoned. Families could move below ground with surprising speed. Animals followed through hidden entrances. Food stores already waited in carefully prepared chambers. Within a short time, entire neighborhoods could disappear beneath the earth, while the landscape above fell strangely silent. For days, or sometimes even longer, life continued below almost exactly as it had before. Bread baked inside stone ovens. Water echoed softly as it was drawn from deep wells. Children whispered instead of shouting as adults carefully conserved food, lamp oil, and every other valuable resource. The underground city did far more than protect lives. It preserved normal life itself. Even during uncertain times, parents continued teaching their children. Neighbors continued helping one another. Prayers continued rising through the quiet darkness. Outside, kingdoms struggled for territory. Inside, ordinary people protected something far more enduring: the routines, relationships, and shared traditions that gave their community its strength. Generation after generation, the hidden city fulfilled the purpose its builders had imagined centuries earlier. It offered not only safety from danger, but also the reassuring promise that life, even in the most uncertain times, could continue beneath the steady shelter of the earth.
For centuries, the underground cities remained faithful companions to the people who had carved them. They offered shelter during moments of uncertainty and quiet comfort during peaceful years. Yet history has a way of introducing challenges that test even the strongest communities, and the centuries that followed would prove to be among the most demanding Cappadocia had ever experienced. Beginning in the 7th century, the Byzantine Empire faced a series of new conflicts, unlike those it had known before. Following the rapid expansion of the early Islamic caliphates, the eastern frontier of the empire became increasingly unstable. Military campaigns crossed Anatolia, and although many battles took place far from Cappadocia itself, the region frequently found itself along the routes of advancing armies and returning soldiers. For the villagers living among the volcanic hills, uncertainty once again became part of everyday life. No one could predict when a distant conflict might suddenly move closer. One season might pass in complete peace. The next could bring rumors carried by merchants or messengers warning that military forces had entered neighboring provinces. The underground cities were no longer ancient relics. They became active refuges once again. Entire families gathered their belongings with practiced efficiency. Clay jars filled with grain were carried into storage rooms. Bundles of dried fruit, baskets of bread, and skins filled with fresh water disappeared beneath concealed entrances. Goats and sheep followed familiar paths into underground shelters, as if generations of careful habit had taught both people and animals exactly where safety could be found. The heavy circular stone doors rolled quietly across their passages once more. Their deep grooves, worn smooth by centuries of use, reflected just how many times they had protected those waiting behind them. Inside, silence became one of the community's greatest allies. Voices remained soft, footsteps echoed gently across stone floors. Oil lamps burned carefully, their flames trimmed to conserve precious fuel during what might become a long stay beneath the earth. Life settled into a patient rhythm. Children continued learning from their parents. Meals were prepared from carefully rationed supplies. Water drawn from protected wells remained the city's most valuable resource, measured thoughtfully so that every family received enough while avoiding unnecessary waste. Although the world above might have been filled with uncertainty, daily routines below remained surprisingly familiar. This quiet order helped calm anxious minds. When people knew what work needed to be done each day, fear lost much of its power.
Some repaired tools. Others inspected ventilation shafts. Experienced stoneworkers examined ceilings and supporting pillars, ensuring that every chamber remained secure. Even during times of refuge, maintenance never stopped.
the city itself depended upon constant care. Archaeological evidence suggests that some underground cities reached astonishing sizes during this period. Derinkuyu, perhaps the most famous of them all, eventually extended many levels beneath the surface and may have sheltered thousands of people where necessary. Nearby settlements such as Kaimakli developed their own extensive underground networks, each adapted to the landscape while sharing many of the same ingenious features. These hidden cities were not isolated fortresses. They formed part of a much broader landscape of resilience, stretching across Cappadocia. While historians continue to study exactly how frequently each city was occupied for extended periods, there is little doubt that generations invested enormous effort in maintaining these remarkable spaces, because they expected them to remain useful whenever danger returned. And danger did return, again and again, in different forms. Empires negotiated peace, only to resume conflict years later. Frontiers shifted, alliances changed. New rulers claimed authority over lands governed by others only a generation before. Through every change, the underground cities waited patiently beneath the earth. They never sought attention. They made no attempt to impress travelers with towering walls or magnificent palaces. Their greatness remained invisible, measured not by what stood above the ground, but by the quiet confidence they offered to ordinary families whenever history grew uncertain. Deep below the rolling hills, surrounded by cool volcanic stone, the people of Cappadocia discovered that true security was not found in monuments that reached towards the sky. It was found in careful preparation, shared responsibility, and the enduring strength of a community that had learned over countless generations how to protect both its people and its way of life beneath the silent earth.
Time, however, changes every human creation. No matter how carefully a city is built or how faithfully it is maintained, there eventually comes a generation that begins living differently from those who came before. The underground cities of Cappadocia were no exception. They remained useful for many centuries, yet the circumstances that had once made them essential slowly began to change. By the late medieval period, the political landscape of Anatolia was transforming once again. The Byzantine Empire gradually weakened, while new Turkish states expanded across the region. Eventually, much of Cappadocia came under the rule of the Seljuk Turks and later the Ottoman Empire. Roads became safer in many areas, local administration grew more stable, and communities slowly adapted to new ways of life. The hidden cities did not vanish overnight. Instead, they entered a quieter chapter. Some families still use portions of the underground complexes as pool storage rooms for grain, wine, and vegetables. Others continued keeping livestock in chambers that remained naturally warm during the cold winter months. Wells were maintained where they were still useful, and a handful of rooms remained familiar gathering places for local residents. But few people now needed to live deep beneath the earth for extended periods. The great circular stone doors that had once protected entire neighborhoods stood silent for years at a time. Oil lamps no longer illuminated every corridor each evening. Many passages echoed only with the occasional footsteps of a farmer retrieving stored food or checking supplies before returning to the sunlight. Nature quietly began reclaiming what human hands had built. Dust settled across abandoned floors. Small rock fragments loosened from ceilings after centuries of natural weathering. In some places, entrances collapsed, sealing entire sections of the underground cities from the outside world. Plants spread across the hills above, hiding the locations of forgotten shafts and concealed doorways. Generation after generation passed. Grandparents who had still remembered stories of family sheltering underground eventually died. Their grandchildren knew only parts of those old tales. By the time several more centuries had gone by, many local legends sounded almost unbelievable. Some people spoke of hidden churches buried beneath villages. Others whispered about endless tunnels leading to distant settlements. Children imagined secret treasure hidden behind enormous stone doors. The stories survived. The knowledge slowly faded. Maps were never drawn showing every corridor. Many entrances remained known only within individual families.
When those families moved away or disappeared, their memories often vanished with them. Little by little, entire sections of the underground world slipped into silence. Above the surface, ordinary villages continued to grow. New homes were built over older foundations. Fields were planted where forgotten ventilation shafts once opened to the sky. Life carried on without most people realizing what still rested beneath their feet.
Travelers crossed Cappadocia without suspecting that vast chambers stretched below the very roads they followed. Historians studying ancient records occasionally encountered mysterious references to hidden refuges beneath the region, but without clear evidence, many details remained uncertain. It seemed almost impossible that entire underground cities, large enough to shelter thousands of people, could simply disappear from common memory. Yet that is precisely what happened. The volcanic stone that had once protected these remarkable communities now concealed them with equal success. For hundreds of years, the underground cities waited in complete darkness. No voices echoed through their corridors. No bread baked inside their kitchens. No children hurried along their winding stairways. Only stillness remained. It was as though history itself had quietly closed the great stone doors one final time, preserving an extraordinary chapter of human ingenuity beneath the earth until a future generation, quite by accident, would discover that the silent cities had never truly disappeared at all.
For centuries, the underground cities remained hidden in complete silence. The seasons continued their endless cycle above. Spring covered the valleys with fresh green grass. Summer baked the volcanic hills beneath a brilliant sun. Autumn filled nearby villages with harvests, while winter wrapped the landscape in quiet snow. Below the surface, however, nothing changed. The air remained cool. The darkness remained complete. Stone corridors that had once echoed with conversation now stood perfectly still, preserving the marks of countless generations who had long since disappeared. Then, quite unexpectedly, history opened one of its oldest doors. In the early 1960s, in the town now known as Derinkuyu, a local resident decided to renovate his home. Like many houses in Cappadocia, it had been built into the soft volcanic rock, and small alterations were nothing unusual. While removing part of a wall, he noticed something strange. Behind the stones was an empty space. Curious, he carefully widened the opening. Instead of finding solid earth, he discovered a narrow passage leading into darkness. The farther he explored, the more astonishing the discovery became. The corridor led to another chamber. That chamber connected to another tunnel. Then another room appeared. Soon it became clear that this was not an ordinary cave. It was part of an enormous underground city that had remained hidden beneath the town for centuries. News of the discovery quickly reached archaeologists. What they encountered exceeded almost every expectation. The passages stretched far deeper than anyone had imagined. There were kitchens blackened by the smoke of ancient fires. Storage rooms still contained niches where massive clay jars had once stood. Animal shelters, living quarters, churches, wells, ventilation shafts, wineries, workshops, and the enormous circular stone doors all remained astonishingly well preserved beneath the earth. Each new tunnel revealed another piece of a forgotten world. Excavations continued carefully. The soft volcanic rock that had made construction possible also required delicate handling to avoid damaging structures that had survived for more than 1,000 years. As researchers mapped additional chambers, they realized that Derinkuyu was far larger than a simple refuge. It extended many levels underground.
Modern excavations have revealed a significant portion of the city, although experts believe that not every section has yet been fully explored. Nearby, archaeologists investigated other underground settlements. K. Markley revealed another remarkable network of tunnels and living spaces. Soon, it became clear that Derinkuyu had never been unique. Across Cappadocia, dozens of underground cities and hundreds of smaller underground complexes had quietly survived beneath villages, farms, and hillsides. Some had been partially remembered by local families. Others had been almost completely forgotten. The discoveries transformed historians' understanding of the region. Ancient written records had hinted at hidden refuges, but standing inside these enormous cities offered something entirely different. Researchers could now follow the same stairways ancient families once climbed. They could examine the ventilation shafts that still carried fresh air. They could touch the heavy stone doors that generations had rolled into place whenever danger approached. Every chamber told a story. The polished floors revealed where thousands of feet had walked. The worn steps showed the paths taken by countless children carrying water from deep wells. The soot-darkened ceilings preserved silent evidence of meals prepared beneath the earth long before modern history had begun. Perhaps the most remarkable discovery was not simply the size of these cities, it was the extraordinary level of planning they revealed. Nothing appeared accidental. Fresh air reached the deepest levels, water remained protected, food storage reflected careful organization,
Religious spaces stood beside living quarters. Workshops operated alongside kitchens. Everything suggested communities that had expected life underground to continue for extended periods whenever circumstances required. Even today, archaeologists continue learning from every new excavation. Advanced technology allows researchers to create detailed maps without disturbing fragile structures. Previously blocked passages are occasionally reopened. Fresh discoveries continue reminding us that much of the underground world still remains unexplored. The silent cities had guarded their secrets for centuries. Now, little by little, they were beginning to share them once again, not through written words, but through carefully carved stone, quiet corridors, and the enduring evidence left behind by generations of ordinary people whose remarkable achievements had waited patiently beneath the earth for the modern world to finally notice.
The rediscovery of the underground cities answered many long-standing questions, yet in many ways it raised even more. Every corridor explored by archaeologists seemed to reveal another mystery waiting quietly beyond the next turn. Some passages ended abruptly behind walls of solid rock, others descended toward levels that remain inaccessible today. In several places, collapsed tunnels hinted that entire sections of these remarkable cities may still lie hidden, untouched for centuries. Modern technology has allowed researchers to examine the underground world with greater care than ever before. Three-dimensional laser scanners create detailed maps of chambers without damaging fragile walls. Ground-penetrating radar helps identify hidden voids beneath the surface, suggesting where unexplored rooms might still exist. Tiny cameras are sometimes guided into narrow openings that no person can safely enter. Even with these tools, much remains unknown. Only portions of many underground cities have been excavated and open to visitors. Archaeologists often choose to leave certain areas untouched, preferring careful preservation over rapid exploration. Every excavation carries some risk, and once an ancient chamber is disturbed, it can never again remain exactly as it was. Patience, just as it was for the original builders, remains essential. As researchers carefully documented the cities, they began piecing together the everyday lives of the people who had once called these places home. Grinding stones revealed where grain had been turned into flour. Wine presses suggested that grapes harvested from nearby vineyards were processed underground before being stored in cool chambers. Blackened ceilings marked the locations of ancient kitchens where simple meals had been prepared countless times. Animal stalls still contained feeding troughs carved directly into the rock. Everything pointed toward practical, organized communities rather than temporary hiding places. Perhaps one of the most remarkable discoveries involved the ventilation systems. Some of the main shafts extended astonishingly deep through the volcanic rock, while continuing to provide fresh air to multiple underground levels. Visitors standing inside these cities today often notice a gentle movement of cool air. The same natural airflow that sustained ancient families continues working, quietly and efficiently after hundreds of years. It is a reminder that true engineering is not always loud or spectacular. Sometimes the greatest designs are those that perform their tasks so well they almost go unnoticed. Archaeologists have also uncovered evidence of remarkable craftsmanship. Stone doors fit precisely into their passages. Carved staircases followed the natural shape of the rock while remaining surprisingly comfortable to climb. Storage rooms were carefully positioned where temperature and humidity remained most stable throughout the year. Nothing appears random.
Everything reflects generations of experience, refined through patient observation. Yet many questions still resist simple answers. Exactly how many people could safely shelter inside Derinkuyu at one time? How frequently were the deepest levels occupied? Were some sections reserved for particular families, craftsmen, or religious communities? Did hidden passages truly connect neighboring underground cities across long distances, as local legends sometimes claim? Evidence offers clues. Legends offer possibilities, but historians remain cautious, separating what archaeology clearly demonstrates from what cannot yet be confirmed. That careful balance is part of what makes these cities so fascinating. They encourage curiosity without abandoning evidence. Every new discovery is welcomed, but every conclusion must be supported by careful research rather than imagination alone. Today, visitors walking through the cool stone corridors often speak in quiet voices without realizing why. Perhaps it is the unusual stillness. Perhaps it is the awareness that generations of ordinary people once laughed, prayed, worked, and raised families within these very walls. Or perhaps it is because the underground cities possess a rare quality that few historical places can offer. They do not merely display history. They allow people to step inside it. With every carefully preserved chamber,
every worn staircase and every silent tunnel disappearing into darkness. These hidden cities continue reminding the modern world that some of humanity's greatest achievements were never built to be seen. They were built simply to protect life, preserve hope, and quietly endure beneath the earth until the right moment arrived for their remarkable story to be told once again.
Even after decades of careful archaeological research, the underground cities of Cappadocia continue to inspire stories that drift gently between history and legend. Where solid evidence ends, human imagination often begins. Local families have passed down tales for generations about hidden chambers that no one has entered for centuries. Some speak of secret passageways stretching beneath entire valleys. Others describe forgotten rooms sealed behind ancient walls, waiting patiently for someone to uncover them once again. These stories are part of the region's cultural heritage. Yet historians approach them with thoughtful caution. One of the most enduring legends claims that certain underground cities were connected by tunnels extending for many kilometers beneath Cappadocia. The idea is certainly captivating. Imagine leaving one hidden city and walking underground for hours before emerging safely inside another community many miles away. Archaeologists have confirmed that some nearby underground complexes were connected by shorter passages or shared natural cave systems. However, there is currently no convincing archaeological evidence that enormous tunnels linked every major underground city across the region. The legend survives because it reflects something people deeply admired about these communities: their remarkable ability to remain connected, even during uncertain times. Another popular story suggests that vast treasures remain hidden somewhere beneath the earth. Ancient coins, religious relics, jewels buried by families fleeing invading armies. Although valuable objects have occasionally been discovered during archaeological excavations, the underground cities were never designed as treasure vaults. Their greatest wealth was far more practical: fresh water, stored grain, safe shelter.
Ventilation that continued working year after year. For the people who lived there, these were treasures beyond price. Some visitors have wondered whether forgotten chambers still remain sealed beyond collapsed walls. This possibility is not merely legend. Because many areas remain inaccessible or unexplored, archaeologists acknowledge that additional rooms and passages may indeed wait beneath the volcanic rock. Future discoveries are entirely possible. What those hidden spaces might contain, however, remains unknown. Careful science, not dramatic speculation, will eventually provide the answers. There are also stories describing mysterious sounds heard deep within certain tunnels. A faint whisper, a distant echo, footsteps that seem to come from empty corridors. Most of these experiences have perfectly ordinary explanations. The underground cities possess remarkable acoustics. Air moving through deep ventilation shafts can produce gentle sounds. Voices travel unexpectedly far along curved passages. Water dripping slowly from natural rock formations creates echoes that seem almost alive in the surrounding silence. Yet standing alone beneath so much stone, it is easy to understand why earlier generations allowed their imaginations to wander. The atmosphere itself encourages reflection. Modern visitors often describe a curious feeling while exploring these cities. Not fear, not excitement, something quieter, a sense of humility. The walls surrounding them were carved by hands that disappeared many centuries ago. The people who once filled these corridors with laughter and conversation left behind almost no written records describing their ordinary lives. Instead, they spoke through architecture. Every staircase tells of countless journeys between different levels. Every storage room reflects careful planning. Every worn threshold reveals how often neighbors crossed from one chamber into another. Their voices have faded. Their craftsmanship remains. Perhaps that is the greatest mystery of all. Not hidden treasure, not secret tunnels, but how ordinary people, working patiently across many generations, created one of the most extraordinary underground landscapes in human history without seeking fame or recognition.
Most of them never expected the world to admire their work. They built these cities because their families needed safety. They carved another room because children required more space. They deepened another well because clean water meant survival. Their achievements grew slowly, almost invisibly, until they became something truly remarkable. As our journey through these hidden cities begins drawing towards its final chapter, the greatest lesson no longer comes from mystery alone. It comes from quiet perseverance. The underground cities remind us that history is often shaped not only by famous rulers whose names fill books, but by countless ordinary people whose patient work continues protecting and inspiring others, long after their own names have been gently carried away by time.
Even after decades of careful archaeological research, the underground cities of Cappadocia continue to inspire stories that drift gently between history and legend. Where solid evidence ends, human imagination often begins. Local families have passed down tales for generations about hidden chambers that no one has entered for centuries. Some speak of secret passageways stretching beneath entire valleys. Others describe forgotten rooms sealed behind ancient walls, waiting patiently for someone to uncover them once again. These stories are part of the region's cultural heritage. Yet historians approach them with thoughtful caution. One of the most enduring legends claims that certain underground cities were connected by tunnels extending for many kilometers beneath Cappadocia. The idea is certainly captivating. Imagine leaving one hidden city and walking underground for hours before emerging safely inside another community many miles away. Archaeologists have confirmed that some nearby underground complexes were connected by shorter passages or shared natural cave systems. However, there is currently no convincing archaeological evidence that enormous tunnels linked every major underground city across the region. The legend survives because it reflects something people deeply admired about these communities: their remarkable ability to remain connected, even during uncertain times. Another popular story suggests that vast treasures remain hidden somewhere beneath the earth. Ancient coins, religious relics, jewels buried by families fleeing invading armies. Although valuable objects have occasionally been discovered during archaeological excavations, the underground cities were never designed as treasure vaults. Their greatest wealth was far more practical: fresh water, stored grain, safe shelter.
Ventilation that continued working year after year. For the people who lived there, these were treasures beyond price. Some visitors have wondered whether forgotten chambers still remain sealed beyond collapsed walls. This possibility is not merely legend. Because many areas remain inaccessible or unexplored, archaeologists acknowledge that additional rooms and passages may indeed wait beneath the volcanic rock. Future discoveries are entirely possible. What those hidden spaces might contain, however, remains unknown. Careful science, not dramatic speculation, will eventually provide the answers. There are also stories describing mysterious sounds heard deep within certain tunnels: a faint whisper, a distant echo, footsteps that seem to come from empty corridors. Most of these experiences have perfectly ordinary explanations. The underground cities possess remarkable acoustics. Air moving through deep ventilation shafts can produce gentle sounds. Voices travel unexpectedly far along curved passages. Water dripping slowly from natural rock formations creates echoes that seem almost alive in the surrounding silence. Yet standing alone beneath so much stone, it is easy to understand why earlier generations allowed their imaginations to wander. The atmosphere itself encourages reflection. Modern visitors often describe a curious feeling while exploring these cities. Not fear,
Not excitement, something quieter, a sense of humility. The walls surrounding them were carved by hands that disappeared many centuries ago. The people who once filled these corridors with laughter and conversation left behind almost no written records describing their ordinary lives. Instead, they spoke through architecture. Every staircase tells of countless journeys between different levels. Every storage room reflects careful planning. Every worn threshold reveals how often neighbors crossed from one chamber into another. Their voices have faded. Their craftsmanship remains.
Perhaps that is the greatest mystery of all. Not hidden treasure, not secret tunnels, but how ordinary people, working patiently across many generations, created one of the most extraordinary underground landscapes in human history without seeking fame or recognition. Most of them never expected the world to admire their work. They built these cities because their families needed safety. They carved another room because children required more space. They deepened another well because clean water meant survival. Their achievements grew slowly, almost invisibly, until they became something truly remarkable. As our journey through these hidden cities begins drawing towards its final chapter, the greatest lesson no longer comes from mystery alone. It comes from quiet perseverance. The underground cities remind us that history is often shaped not only by famous rulers whose names fill books, but by countless ordinary people whose patient work continues protecting and inspiring others long after their own names have been gently carried away by time.
As our journey through the underground cities slowly nears its conclusion, it becomes clear that these remarkable places are far more than archaeological discoveries preserved beneath the hills of Cappadocia. They are quiet reminders of what human beings can accomplish when patience, cooperation, and necessity come together over many generations. Unlike the towering pyramids of Egypt or the vast walls of ancient China, these cities were never meant to be admired. No traveler would pause to marvel at them. No emperor would point proudly toward them from a palace balcony. Their greatest achievement remained completely invisible. That hidden nature is precisely what allowed them to survive. While magnificent monuments above the ground were weathered by wind, damaged by earthquakes, or reshaped by war, the underground cities rested quietly beneath layers of volcanic stone. The same earth that once protected their builders continued protecting their work long after the last families had departed. Today, people from around the world descend the same worn stairways once used by ancient children carrying water or families seeking shelter. Each careful step brings modern visitors closer to lives that, despite the centuries separating us, often feel surprisingly familiar. Parents worried about keeping their children safe. Neighbors shared food during difficult seasons. Communities solved problems together rather than facing them alone. These experiences remain deeply human, no matter the century. Standing inside one of the underground churches, it is easy to imagine the gentle glow of oil lamps reflecting across rough stone walls. In the kitchens, one can almost picture fresh bread emerging from warm ovens. Inside the storage chambers, enormous clay jars seem to wait patiently for another harvest that will never come. The silence itself becomes part of the story. Archaeologists continue working carefully throughout Cappadocia. Every excavation adds another small piece to a puzzle assembled over thousands of years. Some passages remain closed for safety. Others are opened only after months of careful study. Many questions still await future discoveries, reminding us that history is never completely finished. There is always another story waiting beneath the surface. Perhaps that is the greatest gift these underground cities offer. They encourage curiosity without demanding certainty. They remind us that careful observation often reveals far more than quick assumptions.
The people who built these cities understood the value of patience. Modern researchers approach them with the very same respect. Long after the builders themselves were gone, their work continues teaching new generations about engineering, architecture, community, and resilience. Few achievements endure so quietly. Fewer still remain so humble. There are no grand inscriptions celebrating famous architects, no statues honoring wealthy patrons, no triumphal monuments proclaiming victory. Instead, the underground cities celebrate something far more enduring: the quiet determination of ordinary families who chose preparation over panic, cooperation over conflict, and steady effort over short-lived glory. As we finally leave these cool stone corridors and climb once more towards the daylight, the wind still moves gently across the hills of Cappadocia, just as it did centuries ago. Farmers continue working nearby fields. Visitors explore valleys shaped by ancient volcanoes. Children laugh in villages built above one of history's greatest hidden achievements. And beneath their feet, the silent cities remain, exactly where they have always been: patient, peaceful, waiting.
Not because they expect another invasion or another empire to rise and fall, but because they have become timeless guardians of human ingenuity. They remind every traveler who enters their quiet halls that some of the strongest civilizations are not remembered for reaching towards the sky. They are remembered for the wisdom to build strong foundations beneath the earth, foundations of trust, resilience, and hope that continue supporting humanity's story long after the voices of their builders have faded into silence. And with that final thought, our long walk through the hidden world beneath Cappadocia comes gently to an end, leaving behind only the quiet echoes of history and the comforting reminder that even in the darkest places, human ingenuity has always found a way to create light.
The world above has changed beyond anything the builders of the underground cities could have imagined. Where ancient caravans once crossed the valleys, modern roads now wind through the landscape. Hot air balloons rise gently into the morning sky, carrying visitors above the strange rock formations of Cappadocia. Small villages have grown into thriving towns, welcoming travelers from every corner of the world. Yet beneath all of this quiet activity, the underground cities remain almost exactly as they have for centuries. They ask for nothing, they simply endure. Walking through these ancient passages today is a remarkably humbling experience. The ceilings are still low in many places, encouraging visitors to move slowly and thoughtfully. The stairways remain uneven beneath careful footsteps, polished smooth by generations of people who once carried water, baskets of grain, sleeping children, or simple oil lamps through the same narrow corridors. The air is cool, the silence is gentle. Even surrounded by other visitors, there are moments when the underground world feels completely timeless. It is easy to forget the modern age for a while. Archaeologists often describe these cities as some of the greatest examples of practical engineering in the ancient world, not because they were the largest structures ever built, not because they displayed extraordinary luxury, but because nearly every feature solved a real human problem. Fresh air reached the deepest chambers, water remained protected, food could be stored for long periods, families found warmth during winter and cool shelter during summer. Entire communities could disappear beneath the earth without abandoning the routines that made daily life possible. Few civilizations have left behind such an elegant balance between simplicity and ingenuity. The underground cities also remind us that survival has always depended upon cooperation. No single person carved Derinkuyu, no individual designed every tunnel beneath Kaimakli or the many other hidden settlements scattered across Cappadocia. Thousands of ordinary people contributed small pieces across many generations. One family expanded a storage room, another deepened a well. Skilled stoneworkers strengthened ceilings. Parents taught children how to maintain the passages. Each generation inherited a city that was slightly larger, slightly stronger, and slightly wiser than the one before. Perhaps that quiet collaboration is the true masterpiece hidden beneath the earth. Today, historians continue studying these remarkable places, knowing that every new discovery adds another sentence to a story that is still being written. Some chambers remain closed, some tunnels still disappear behind collapsed walls.
Future archaeologists may one day uncover rooms that have remained untouched for 1,000 years. If they do, those silent spaces will almost certainly tell the same familiar story, not of kings, not of conquest, but of ordinary families determined to protect one another. As we finally leave the cool volcanic stone behind and step once more into the sunlight of Cappadocia, the landscape appears much as it always has. Gentle valleys stretch toward the horizon. The wind moves quietly through the grass. Ancient rock formations stand patiently beneath the open sky. Nothing on the surface fully reveals the extraordinary world hidden below. And perhaps that is exactly as its builders intended. For centuries, these cities fulfilled their purpose without seeking recognition. They offered safety without demanding praise. They preserved hope without asking to be remembered. Yet today, after slowly wandering through their silent corridors together, we remember them nonetheless. Not simply because they are astonishing archaeological discoveries, but because they reveal something timeless about humanity itself. When faced with uncertainty, people do more than survive. They adapt, they learn, they cooperate. They build not only with stone, but with trust.
And sometimes the greatest achievements in history are the ones that remain hidden beneath our feet, patiently waiting for future generations to discover the quiet brilliance left behind by those who came long before. As the evening grows still and our journey comes gently to its end, the underground cities fade once more into peaceful silence. Their corridors remain cool, their stone doors remain unmoved, their ancient walls continue keeping watch beneath the hills of Cappadocia, just as they have for countless generations. May their quiet endurance remind us that history is not only written in towering monuments that reach toward the sky. Sometimes it is written deep beneath the earth, in places built with patience, protected by community, and remembered through the timeless echoes of human resilience. And with that final quiet thought, our long walk through the secret underground cities comes peacefully to an end.